are alive in another month of calendar year 2023. It is already the second day of March. Thanks for watching the Calvary briefing today. If I were to ask you if you have any friends, most of you would probably tell me that you do. And if I asked you to describe your friends, you would talk about people that perhaps lived in this area, or perhaps even people who lived at a distance who were still your friends. Over the last 30 years, as I have been reading books and articles, I have found that many of the authors that I read often almost seem like friends to me. And recently, I read an article by one of these authors that I sort of feel is a friend of mine by the name of Dave Harvey. I recommend one of Dave's books to many married couples, and the title of it is When Sinners Say I Do. It's a great book for couples who are married to read through and see how Christ impacts their marriage. Well, in a recent article that Dave wrote, I got to know him just a little bit better. Dave Harvey shared that he and his wife recently lost a child who suffered from addiction, and they are now responsible to raise their 2-year-old grandson. And as Dave Harvey shared this fact about his life and shared this experience, it came in an article entitled The Clay Pot Conspiracy. And he began by telling about an historical event that happened in 1947. A shepherd was out taking care of his flock near the Dead Sea. And one of his lambs went near a cave. And as he chased the lamb down and he got to the cave, he looked in and it was total darkness. And he picked up a rock and he threw it into the cave. He heard a shattering noise, and he went into the cave and discovered a row of clay pots. Some of the pots were as large as he was. And as he popped the top off of one of these pots, he found ancient scrolls. Some of the scrolls were blackened and couldn't even be read, but some of them were wrapped in linen, and we know them as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are excerpts from the Bible that have been preserved for thousands of years. This was an incomprehensible treasure that was stored in some clay pots in a cave. Well, the clay pot conspiracy, according to Dave Harvey, is based on the fact that living for Jesus and serving God is hard. You might mistakenly think that God pulled you into His family because of all of your great strengths. Maybe because of what you can do. Well, Paul tells us otherwise. Paul tells us this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We're afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. Paul served the church in Corinth. And if you read his 2 letters to Corinth, you know that serving this church was a tough task. He faced opposition. Tradition tells us that Paul likely had some kind of an unattractive eye condition. And so Paul was viewed as being very plain, not really easy to look at, too rough and too weak. But Paul argued back to the Corinthian believers there in a very strange way. As these accusations came to Paul, Paul said, "Guilty. All of those things are true. You think my weakness disqualifies me, but actually, it's the core of my credentials." Well, the word conspiracy in back of clay pot kind of conjures up feelings in our minds that aren't really good. We don't really like conspiracies. But Dave Harvey thinks, and I happen to agree with him, that it accurately conveys the essence behind God's hidden agenda. God has a covert plan that is in place working to sabotage the enemy and to display his power. It's a secret design that humbles the proud and abolishes boasting and establishes the ground for a long, long ministry. What is meant by the clay pot conspiracy could be summed up in kind of a math formula with words. Our weakness plus God's strength equals resilient ministry. Our normal behavior is to take valuable things and to store them very carefully. If I gave you $100,000 bills, you probably wouldn't put it in a clay pot in your living room. But God stores the most important treasure, the good news of Jesus found in the gospel, in us. And what are we? Paul says it, we're clay pots. We are easily broken. We are often glued back together or taped back together with duct tape. And in God's ways and in God's mind, it's perfect. Paul says it. Let me share with you my ministry profile, Corinthians. I'm afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Ministry, serving God for Paul, was complicated. It was excruciating. It was a life where he was afflicted, persecuted, struck down. But Paul says, we're always carrying in the body the death of Jesus. It was just a part of serving God here on earth. Dave Harvey closed his article with these words. When I look into my grandson's eyes and I see my daughter, the pain reminds me that God breaks the pot to free its power. If you're in ministry serving Him and experiencing any kind of loss, the breaking is also forging a more durable soul, the kind that reminds the world of the true power behind a crucified Savior. Do not forget that my weakness plus God's power equals resilience in serving Him. That's the clay pot conspiracy, and it is magnificent.